Well, welcome to Lead Talks. This is Bong Baylon, your host, and I'm excited today because I'll be interviewing my friend, Pastor Mike Cariño, one of the faculty of IGSL. And today we're going to talk about developing the leader's mind. Okay, but first of all, I'd like Pastor Mike to just introduce himself briefly. Hi, Pastor Mike, how are you?
Hello, Pastor Bong. Thank you for having me in this segment of yours. Yes, I'm a faculty of the International Graduate School of Leadership. I teach theology. I also am a missionary pastor in a local church, Christian Bible Church of the Philippines. I finished my Master of Divinity 2009 in Biblical Studies. At the same time, afterwards, I took Master of Arts in Philosophy. So, having those two backgrounds, Bible, theology, plus philosophy, gave me somehow an appetite for training, equipping, motivating, and inspiring believers and leaders as well to pursue excellence in the mind, excellence in thinking, and flourishing in our way of honoring God through the mind.
So you're the right person to talk to when it comes to developing the leader's mind.
I hope so.
I think a lot of leaders perhaps do not fully understand why that should really be part of their, thinking or mindset. Really focusing on the mind itself. Because I think a lot of leaders are more into the tasks, the things that needs to be done, and sometimes they do not step back and develop their thinking behind those tasks.
Yes.
So maybe you can just help us to understand when you say developing the leader's mind. What exactly are your thoughts about this?
Yes, the Bible at the very onset invites every believer to love God with all our hearts, with all our being, with all our strength, and particularly with all our mind. So that implies that God values a holistic, an integral approach to worshiping Him and serving Him. The ancients were known as contemplative reflectors, started with the Greeks and the Hebrews. They were actually passionate about trying to understand the world, trying to figure out how the world works, trying to understand the ways of God. And that involves a lot of thinking, that involves a lot of contemplating and reflecting and reasoning. And so, but something happened in history. Something happened. Many believers frowned upon the mind or reasoning or the intellect and emphasized more on the passions and the emotions, neglecting the importance of right thinking. Instead, we developed a community and a culture of just focusing on the heart, which is not necessarily bad in and of itself. But when we neglect that aspect of when believers think and when believers reason out, when believers enter the field of logic and philosophy, we lose the greatness in Christianity. We lose people like C.S. Lewis's and William Lane Craig. We lose the intellectuals in our midst, and at the same time, it brings a bad reputation that Christians are brainless, Christians are non-thinkers, Christians are unreasonable, anti-science, anti-intellect, and so there is now this movement.
No, you talk about this. I would assume this is a slow development, perhaps not necessarily cataclysmic or immediate. But what possibly accounted for that? What made that shift from perhaps a balanced way of approaching it with both the passions as well as the mind, and then slowly shifting, like you said, more on the emotions rather than both of them? What accounts for that?
Yeah, well, historically, there was a dryness that happened when people just emphasized the mind. People tend to become extremely contemplative, extremely rational, and extremely intellectualized in everything they do, at the neglect of the heart. And so that's how scholasticism in history happened. it became a dry Christianity, a dry spirituality.
So it was a reaction.
Yes, yes.
So it was a pendulum reaction.
That's
from,
right.
Basically looking at how it became stale, or
Right,
maybe
right.
more, on the intellectual side of
Right.
things, and then neglecting the emotional aspect. So there's a pendulum shift.
That's right.
To the other direction. And you are basically advocating going back, I suppose, in the middle, and
Yes,
not to
yes.
the other side of the pendulum.
Yes, yes. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be both both the heart and the mind. The convergence of our passions and our intellect honors God, pursues a flourishing life, and an integral, holistic Christianity. And so that's what's going on today. We hear people who are today we call smart bashing, no? There's
Smart bashing.
Oh,
Okay.
there's an anti-intellectualism going on when people frown upon individuals who seem to advocate better thinking, sound reasoning in terms of the faith and in terms of our spirituality. Of course, there are also a frowning upon emotionalism and an overemphasis on passions in the heart. But
So both sides are actually frowning upon each
that's
other.
right. That's right.
Okay.
But there has to be a catalyst or a movement towards harmonizing, because we cannot live without both, without the heart and the mind. So there has to be this balanced approach to spirituality and to faith.
I remember Dallas Willard one time said that there was this shift from looking at faith as a subjective experience, or maybe a subjective domain,
Yes.
as opposed to truth being objective.
Yes.
And slowly we gave into that kind of separation.
That's right.
So that now people would say, when it comes to faith, you're not really talking about objective facts. You're talking about subjective experience. So how do you respond to that?
That's right. That's very interesting, because when we encounter God, when we approach the realm of the divine, the realm of the beyond and the transcendent, there are many aspects of that aspect of reality that the mind cannot comprehend. The mind is like a cup, and God, the infinite, the transcendent one, is like an ocean. When the cup tries to contain the entire ocean, it fails.
I think some people have tried that.
That's right. So
I think it's called systematic theology, maybe, right?
Exactly. And so while the mind and the intellect is very, very valuable in our existence as human being, there are only limited things. Because we're finite beings, there are only limited things that we can grasp. That's where the heart comes in. The heart can access and connect and comprehend and grasp things that the mind cannot. That's why science and philosophy and logic fails in terms of trying to explain faith in a deeper way. Because sometimes logic and reasoning and philosophy, we're stuck with evidences and proofs and fallacies and syllogisms. But that's a very impoverished way of seeing the beyond,
Or
and
the bigger picture.
That's
as
right.
You might say, yeah.
So it has to be allied with our experiences, with our passions, with our intuitions.
Yeah.
So we come away with a richer and a more fuller philosophy and theology.
In other words, we don't have to separate these things.
That's right.
It's
That's
all
right.
part of this one big package. And I think it's important to emphasize, especially for our listeners, for them to understand that there's a rational side
Yes.
in faith, as well as the emotional and experiential side to faith. And we cannot really be an either-or kind of person, but really grasp or embrace both of them. And of course, including the will and even the bodily
Actions.
aspects of our faith
Yes.
is included there.
Many
Now, perhaps Pastor Mike can tell us or share with our listeners what would be the value of developing the leader's mind.
Yes, when we have leaders who value and practice and pursue sound thinking and excellent reasoning, and value the reading and the hearing of excellent minds and excellent thinkers, we produce better people. We produce better leaders. In a sense, we produce better Christians. We produce more C.S. Lewis's, Alvin Plantinga, and excellent contribution.
Ay, Pastor Mike Cariño, I suppose.
We contribute excellently to society as well. We belong.
In what sense does it contribute? Because we sharpen our thoughts on this. In what way do they contribute?
Yes. That's one aspect. We have a platform and a credibility to engage the intellectuals of our times, and the scientists, the psychologists, the philosophers of our times. We gain traction and we gain credibility as believers that Christians are worth hearing, and our voices can be reasonable. So that's one value. The second value is there's an inherent fulfillment. Aristotle and Plato calls this eudaimonia, the flourishing life. It's the path to the fulfilled, the flourishing, the happy life. When we cultivate the mind, there's something about cultivating the mind.
Is that a biological thing or is that a philosophical thing?
I think it's both. It's the
both,
whole.
yes.
It's a human thing. When we read a novel by a great person, or when we read a scientific theory or a philosophical proposal by a great thinker, something happens to our humanity. We become better human beings. We live well. We behave well. We act well. When our beliefs are shaped and conformed to the excellent virtues of life, to the excellent values of living. The other thing that benefits us when we allow our leaders to be trained intellectually in excellence, aside from gaining credibility and being able to engage society in a rational, intellectual way, and also finding fulfillment. I also believe deep in my heart that thinking leads to better living. Right thinking, better thinking, excellent thinking leads to excellent lives, excellent behaviors, excellent relationships. But there's a path towards excellent thinking. And that's where we can learn from the disciplines. There has to be an interdisciplinary approach to how we live our lives. We listen to the scientists. We listen.
Now, of course, you also. You have to clarify also that when you say thinking, it's not just the process, but also the content.
That's right.
Of the thinking, because some people, as we all know, are very good thinkers, but they're really thinking of the wrong things.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
So,
yes.
please speak on that.
Exactly. Part of sound reasoning, part of excellent thinking, is you filter. You filter truth from error. You filter what is excellent from those who are the ideas and beliefs that are praiseworthy, and ideas and beliefs and thinking that are blameworthy. Discerning what makes us better human beings and better believers. But at the same time, there's this assumption that God works through two books, the Word of God and the World of God. We will listen to the voice of God through the Scriptures in matters of faith, in matters of salvation, in matters of the spiritual lives. But at the same time, we listen to the Book of God through the World in matters of human behavior and human connections. And so we listen to God's truth embedded in the sciences, in philosophy, in psychology, and medicine.
So wherever truth may be found.
Exactly. All truth is God's truth. But the vehicles are two. The Word of God and the World of God. That's where excellent thinking comes in. We sift through all the proposals in the marketplace, in business, in engineering, in psychology.
That's a hard task.
In neurology. Exactly. And we will listen. So we pray for healing for our bodies, but we listen to the doctors for surgery and for antibiotics. That's a life of wisdom. My proposal is we pursue a life of wisdom. Wisdom involves both the heart and the mind. So there's a stereotype that wisdom is just right thinking and sound thinking, but essentially wisdom is an integrated life. It's a life that pursues flourishing. It's a life, as the Greeks would call it, the life that is flourishing, the life that is abundant. And so,
now, one of the things that Paul mentioned in one of his writings is that knowledge puffs up.
yes,
And in some cases, as I've experienced, maybe you have experienced this, facing up with quote-unquote, intellectual people, or let's just talk about on the Christian side, not even on the, the other side, but
Yes.
among Christians, that there are those who are, air quotes, intellectuals. And that's exactly what happens. They begin to get puffed up and assume that how the nuances or the thing that they have come to in agreement with in their minds, and how they perhaps communicate this, like, okay, this is the way I understand truth.
Yeah.
And of course all of us are coming from a certain kind of filter,
Right.
pre-understanding and all of that, but then they come across as a bit arrogant. So how do you speak on that? I mean, that's not a value, but it's more like
yes.
a negative thing.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. Yes, that's very true. The Bible is clear on that. When we gain knowledge, we have a tendency to feel important. That's what accolades and titles and badges do. It's like we sense that we are better than others. However, the path of wisdom incorporates the virtue not only of acquiring knowledge, but also the virtue of acquiring humility and acquiring of open-mindedness. So this intellectual virtue of collaborating with other thinkers and listening to other voices forces us to realize that we are cups. We are cups trying to contain an ocean. It also humbles us to realize that there are many things we do not know.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the path. That's the path of the wise. In fact, the Apostle Paul also warns us of philosophy. So it's like he red flags philosophy. Oh, don't just follow the philosophy of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're foolishness in God's eyes.
Right.
But he also advocates a type of philosophy that is Christ-centered and God-honoring.
Yeah.
And so while
We are to pray with the mind as well as,
that's right.
with the
So
spirit.
while there are bad apples, not all philosophers, not all intellectuals can be arrogant and bigoted and narcissists.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like that.
That's right.
But
That's right.
yeah, I think the mind is truly capable of a lot of great things. I mean, I believe that's part of how God has created mankind,
Yes.
with a capacity really that goes beyond the animal kingdom.
Yes.
And because of that, there's always the temptation of the mind veering off or going in the direction apart from a right relationship with God, or apart from the proper orientation with God, such that the mind, with all its capacity, now
That's
becomes on its own, veering out there, rather than the mind being subject to God's mind.
That's right.
If we may call it the logos, the
Yes,
God's mind.
yes. That's why sometimes I cringe, when you go to social media or just you listen to intellectual debates. I cringe at the thought that they use knowledge and whatever they have acquired to lambast people,
Yes,
and to make them make themselves feel superior. That's not the point of knowledge. Knowledge is supposed to benefit humanity and invite more dialogue and discussion. Yes, so many of the great thinkers we admire, philosophers, are open-minded people.
Yeah.
They listen to voices and they hang out with people they disagree with, knowing and believing that we become better human beings, we become better thinkers, simply by just listening to others and realizing that we don't have all the answers.
So really, a wise mind is something that would really benefit a leader,
Yes,
right? So are there other values? Are there other benefits that you might be thinking of right now, other than what you have mentioned so far?
Yeah, so aside from intellectual humility, intellectual open-mindedness, I would also advocate for intellectual conscientiousness. Intellectual conscientiousness is trying to have integrity with our beliefs, integrity with our propositions and our thinking. So that means we have to have the skill of following where the evidence leads, of revising our positions and our views when evidence demands it, and the integrity to let go of our wrong beliefs in place of better beliefs. I think that's conscientiousness, and that also leads to wisdom. No?
It's not easy to do.
Exactly, because, for example, the Asians we are very emotional people. No? We hold on to our long-held beliefs, cherished beliefs, cultural beliefs, even if
the evidence goes the other way.
That's right. Reason and logic and evidence dictates that we revise it.
Yeah, but both of us have had our theological training and all of that, and part of that is revising some of the things that you used to hold on as part of your beliefs. But at the same time, this can be very unnerving and very scary, since beliefs tend to give you that like sense of assurance that you're in control of things.
Security.
Yeah, it's security. And when you begin to see that, maybe I believe the wrong thing about this, and so you're not going to embrace a different thing. So that's kind of unraveling, so to speak, right?
Yes, there's a term for that. It's called intellectual integrity. When you are willing and open to admitting that I may be wrong. When you come with that attitude, you are willing to listen to others with the attitude na, I may be wrong. Let me hear the other voices.
Yeah, let me take the evidences again, and be open-minded.
So, excuse me. And when that applies to leadership teams and leadership values and leadership excellencies, an open-minded, humble leader goes a long, long, long way.
Right. So, we have basically established that it's really a positive thing. It's something that adds value to the leader if he can focus on developing his mind. Now, let's talk about how does he do that? Okay, how does the leader develop his mind?
Yes. So one, you hang out with great thinkers.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. So you pin down people you admire. In philosophy, they are now proposing that admiration, the value, the virtue, or the emotion of admiration, also makes us better thinkers. When we admire a certain author, when we admire a certain speaker, or a certain thinker, or a certain leader, we tend to imbibe, emulate whatever excellences we find in him. Of course, nobody is perfect, but when excellence is contagious, so when you try to follow a person, how he lives, how he thinks, that's one path to becoming an excellent thinker, pursuing an excellent mind.
So look for a model or somebody that you can follow.
Yes. The other path is very, very foreign to an Asian culture, for example. This started in the West. It's the value of critical thinking. Critical thinking, for example, today, the best educational system is in Finland. They teach children, kindergarten, toddlers, on how to deconstruct ideas and reconstruct it again. They read books, and they listen to music, and they try to criticize. They try to have this habit of critique. Of course, it's a constructive critique because you try to learn and you try to unlearn and you try to acquire better knowledge, better thinking, better beliefs, more reasonable approach to life. So critical thinking is very contrary to our educational system. Our classrooms are filled with an environment of parroting. No, so it's like what the teacher says, we parrot, and we hold it as the ultimate belief. No, we do not question, we do not criticize, we do not have this habit of critiquing.
So it has to do with the philosophy, really, of learning as well as teaching, right?
Yes.
So developing that kind of philosophy of putting priority to truth as truth rather than simply just, like you said, parroting what the professor says.
Right, that's right. And of course, it has also to do with our teaching methods, spoon feeding and lecturing versus allowing doubts and questions and debates, and recognizing our dissonances, recognizing things that are hard to reconcile, and then also hearing the a variety of views and perspectives out there that seem to offer solutions. So,
and being at peace with the temporary maybe dissonance,
that's
the tensions,
The
and not necessarily having to forcing yourself to resolve everything
right away.
Right away.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And of course, some teachers of pedagogy will say that the goal is not to resolve. It's the journey of wrestling with the issues that makes us better human beings. Of course, it's bonus when we get all the answers, when we get it all figured out. But that's too boring. So the wrestling and the seeking and the doubting and the arguing. Yeah.
I suppose it's basically arriving at conclusions that probably would be characterized as maybe beyond reasonable doubt. That would be the best way to characterize it.
Yes.
There are still some doubts. I think some people struggle with the idea that faith must not have any kind of doubt, but in reality, doubts is really part of the process. There are some things that you're not sure of, but you come to that point where you can say, at least this ones I'm sure of, okay, because it's reasonable and rational to actually come to this conclusion, even though there may be some aspects to this that I don't have answers for.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. There is something about our existence as human beings. There's something about not having the answer. There's something about being opposed. There's something about experiencing pain and difficulty and experiencing a season of doubting and questioning that makes life worth living for. Can you imagine if for example, if you play basketball and you're always the winner? It's a meaningless life.
Yes.
It's like if your team is always the champion, of course you won't want others to win as well. Or if you are always comfortable and convenient and pain-free life, it's like it's a meaningless existence. So in a sense, our doubts and our dissonances and our tensions and our disagreements and people who oppose our beliefs and give us pain in our understanding of life, that contributes to the flourishing life.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that makes us wiser beings.
That's true. So first, find a model, and then second, develop critical thinking. Anything else that we can do as leaders?
Aside from hanging out with the wise, we try to figure out how it is to become wise. From the very unlikely places. We think it's in a university with philosophers, but it's in the unlikely places. When we're riding and commuting on a bus, or trying to figure out how to teach a child not to lie.
So you're a contemplative commuter.
Yes, I'm falling in line in an ATM machine and trying to control our patience, or conversing with someone we are intimidated or someone we hate, and trying to show kindness to people who don't deserve it. These are very, very simple
disciplines of the mind.
Exactly.
Yes.
You think and you try to rationalize a proper action, a proper response, a proper conversation. Not to honk your car's horn when and you don't go ballistic right away when people are crazy.
Or not having the last word.
Exactly.
In a conversation.
Yes. And that's a good way to put it. We intentionally, consciously admit that we don't have all the answers.
Right. Yeah. And for someone who's probably very intelligent, that may be a big challenge.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Well, I think that's all for now. We have talked a lot about developing the leader's mind. You defined it and gave us some insight on the value of it, and also some tips on how to develop it. Any last word, Pastor Mike?
Well, the first is to fellow believers, fellow Christians. Don't be intimidated with passion to pursue an excellent mind, to pursue sound reasoning, and to pursue excellent thinking. These are all biblical imperatives. The Bible invites us to honor God, to love God with an excellent mind.
Yes.
And then my next address would be to those who are seeking God, or those who are seeking the truth of Christianity. I invite you to look at the intellectual aspects of the faith. While the faith is not just about the mind, it's also about the heart. The mental and the intellectual aspects of Christianity is worth hearing,
Worth looking at.
and worth looking at.
Yes. Well, there you have it, friends. Thank you for listening to Lead Talks. This is Bong Baylon, and I'm here with Pastor Mike Cariño of IGSL. And do share our podcast, and I hope that you would really learn a lot from these conversations. And I'll see you again next time. Bye.